In the history of Major League Baseball, there are only 14 players ever to have at least 2,000 hits, at least 150 home runs, at least 150 stolen bases, and a career batting average of at least 300. 11 of those 14 are in the Hall of Fame. Of the 3 not in the Hall of Fame, one is Jose Altuve, who is still active, but is on a solid Hall of Fame projection. Another is Pete Rose, who was banned from Major League Baseball and the Hall of Fame due to him betting on games while a member of the Cincinnati Reds. That third and final player on this exclusive list that is not in the Hall of Fame is Bill Madlock. Who is Bill Madlock, and just how great was he? Bill Madlock was a third baseman who played in Major League Baseball for 15 seasons from 1973 to 1987. He spent the most time with the Pittsburgh Pirates, but also played for the Los Angeles Dodgers, Chicago Cubs, San Francisco Giants, Texas Rangers, and Detroit Tigers. You may know him as being one of the centerpieces in the Fergie Jenkins trade. Jenkins, a Hall of Fame starting pitcher, was traded from the Cubs to the Rangers following the 1973 season in exchange for Madlock and another prospect. It's actually kind of amazing that Madlock played baseball professionally to begin with. As a multi-sport high school athlete, he reportedly received over 150 scholarships to play collegiate basketball, over 100 for college football, and a grand total of 2 for baseball. Madlock chose baseball. He chose baseball because I didn't want to have 6'5" 250-pound guys bearing down on me, so I decided to play baseball. Imagine a highly touted high school athlete saying that nowadays. How did Madlock's baseball career turn out, you're wondering? In his career, he came to the plate over 7,300 times, slashing .305 with a .365 on base and .442 slugging for an .807 OPS and 123 adjusted OPS. He has 2,008 career hits, 163 home runs, 174 stolen bases, over 850 runs and RBIs, and nearly 3,000 total bases. One of the finest disciplined hitters of his era, Madlock has nearly 100 more walks than strikeouts, being just one of 5 hitters in the divisional era to walk at least 605 times with no more than 510 strikeouts. His accolades also include 3 All-Star Game selections, Rookie of the Year votes, and MVP votes in 6 different seasons, placing as high as 6th. He's also a World Series winner as he was a member of the Pittsburgh Pirates when they won the World Series in 1979. In 7 games during that series, all Madlock did was bat .375 in 29 plate appearances. That includes a 4-for-4 performance in Game 5 with his team down 3-1. While his career stats and accomplishments may seem unimpressive compared to other great players, in actuality, Bill Madlock was not only one of the best players during his time in Major League Baseball, but he's one of the greatest third basemen ever. During his time in baseball, Madlock was one of 43 players to have at least 7,000 plate appearances. Of those 43, he ranks 18th in hits, 14th in OPS, 16th in adjusted OPS, 13th in stolen bases, 31st in home runs, 29th in total bases, and 26th in WAR. His .305 batting average also ranks 4th among that group, and I'll talk about that mark later. That was in comparison to all players, but what about third basemen specifically? There weren't many third basemen who played as much as Madlock during his career, but if we lower the threshold in half to 3,500 plate appearances over those same years, Madlock was still fantastic, ranking 5th in both OPS and adjusted OPS. Based on those 2 stats in particular, it demonstrates he was one of the top hitters during his era while being one of the best contact hitters of the sport as well. What Madlock lacked in power, he made up for with a low strikeout rate and high batting average. That was all in comparison to players during his era, but what about all time? Through the 2023 season, there have been 383 players with as many or more plate appearances as Madlock. He ranks 172nd in OPS and 147th in adjusted OPS. Arguably a top 150 hitter of that group, but what about his counting stats? Among all players of all time, Madlock is within the top 300 in hits, top 400 in WAR and total bases, and top 525 in stolen bases and home runs. Those rankings might not seem notable at all, but consider this. If we look solely at third basemen, there have been 41 with as many or more plate appearances as Madlock, and he ranks 13th in OPS, 8th in adjusted OPS, and 5th in batting average. Looking at all third basemen all time, Madlock ranks 22nd in hits, 57th in home runs, 32nd in stolen bases, 30th in total bases, and 39th in WAR. He's legitimately a top 15 hitting third baseman of all time, if not top 10. His counting stats may suffer in comparison, but that can be attributed to his lack of play appearances, as he only ranks 41st among third basemen in that category. While his counting stats are low, he was still able to achieve several notable milestones that only a few throughout history have matched. At the very beginning of this video, I mentioned how Madlock was one of 14 players ever to have at least 2,000 hits, at least 150 home runs, at least 150 stolen bases, and a career batting average of at least 300. On screen now is that full list of players, and as you can see, it's comprised of mostly Hall of Famers. Madlock didn't have a lot of notable statistics, but he was well versed in what he could do, being able to hit at an elite rate while having a decent amount of power and speed. This is where I want to get into Madlock's batting average. I rarely talk about a player's batting average in my videos, due to it being less important than other statistics. However, it's not a useless stat, and Madlock was a wizard at hitting for a high average. You see, Bill Madlock has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 batting titles. He led the National League in batting average in 1975, 1976, 1981, and 1983. Through 2023, Madlock is one of 12 players ever in the modern era to have at least 4 batting titles. The other 11 to achieve this feat are Roberto Clemente, Tony Gwynn, Rogers Hornsby, Stan Musial, Honus Wagner, Wade Boggs, Miguel Cabrera, Ty Cobb, Harry Heilmann, and Ted Williams. For those unaware, those are all Hall of Famers with the exception of Cabrera, but he'll be a first ballot electee once eligible. Something I admire about Madlock is how he was able to achieve one of those batting titles. Entering the final day of the 1976 season, Bill Madlock was second in the National League in batting average, having a .333 mark. The leader was Ken Griffey, a member of the Cincinnati Reds who had a comfortable lead with a .338 average. Wanting to preserve his lead for batting champion, Griffey sat out the final game of the season against the Atlanta Braves, while Madlock started against the Montreal Expos. Madlock would have to go a clean 4 for 4, which would push his average to .339. Anything less than 4 hits would squander his chance to steal the batting title. Well, Bill Madlock proceeded to collect 4 hits in his first 4 at-bats, all by the 6th inning, to suddenly catapult himself into the lead. When his turn to bat came up again in the 8th inning, Madlock made the wise decision to have a pinch hitter bat for him, ending his season with a .339 average. Just a single point ahead of Griffey. Speaking of which, Griffey, whose game was occurring simultaneously, heard about Madlock's performance and suddenly inserted himself into the game as a pinch hitter in the 7th inning. He would strike out in both of his at-bats, lowering his average to .336. One of the most clutch and tight races for the lead in any statistic, Madlock delivered with his 4 for 4 performance. I don't believe it's far-fetched to say that Bill Madlock is one of the greatest contact hitters of all time. In the modern era of Major League Baseball, through 2023, there have been 963 players with at least 5,000 career plate appearances, and Madlock is inside the top 100 in batting average. If we look at 522 players with as many plate appearances since Madlock's debut year in 1973, he now ranks 22nd in batting average. Despite being such a fantastic hitter, why do I consider him to be underrated? 2 main reasons, with the first being his competition. There were several other notable third basemen who played during Madlock's time in Major League Baseball. This includes Brooks Robinson, George Brett, Wade Boggs, Greg Nettles, and Ron Cey, just to name a few. The second and main reason is his lack of playing time and counting stats. A tremendous player, Madlock suffers gratefully from a lack of notable milestones. Under 200 home runs and stolen bases, under 1,000 runs and RBIs, under 40 WAR, and just barely eclipsing the 2,000 hits mark, just to name a few. While his 7,000 plus plate appearances are a lot, it's not much when compared to Hall of Famers and other notable players. I mentioned earlier how Madlock is outside the top 40 for plate appearances among third basemen. In fact, with the exception of Negro League players, There are only 2 third basemen in the modern era with fewer plate appearances that are in the Hall of Fame. In addition to plate appearances, it's rare to find any player in the Hall of Fame with a combination of counting stats that low. How rare? Let's just say, among National League and American League players, you can count on one hand. While I, and probably most people, don't believe Bill Madlock ought to be elected into the Hall of Fame, I am a firm believer that he could have been elected had he reached slightly higher hitting milestones. Perhaps 2,500 hits, 200 home runs and stolen bases, and 50 WAR would have pushed him over the edge. It'd be hard to argue against a player with those stats, along with 4 batting titles and a 123 adjusted OPS. What's interesting is he did earn 1.4 WAR and hit at a 117 adjusted OPS as a 36-year-old designated hitter for the Tigers in his final season in 1987. Maybe he could have kept going in the big leagues, but we'll never know. Bill Madlock, one of the finest third basemen in MLB history, and perhaps the most underrated one as well.